She'd been chained for 5 days. No food, no water, no mercy. When the American soldier opened that cattle car door, she expected torture, expected violence, expected death. Instead, he crouched down, looked into her eyes, and asked 3 words. 3 simple words that broke her more completely than any cruelty ever could. What were those 3 words, and why did they shatter everything she'd been taught about the enemy? Stay with me, because this story from a frozen German rail yard in 1945 will show you something about the power of kindness that you've never seen before. The rail yard had no name anymore. Whatever the Germans had called it, some bureaucratic designation stamped on schedules and freight manifests, was gone now, erased by the same artillery that had cratered the switching station and twisted the signal towers into abstract sculptures of bent iron. By April 17th, 1945, it was just another wound in the landscape, another scar left behind as the Third Reich bled out across Bavaria. Sergeant William Henderson's patrol reached the yard at 10:40 that morning. 12 men, tired cold, their boots crunching on frost that still clung to the gravel despite the weak spring sun. They'd been walking since before dawn, following rail lines eastward, part of the massive cleanup operation that trailed behind General Patton's Third Army like a broom sweeping up the debris of conquest. Henderson was 29 years old, tall and lean, with the weathered face of a man who'd seen too much war. He carried a pocket Bible his mother had given him, a photograph of his wife, Mary, and baby daughter Sue, a pack of Lucky Strike cigarettes, and a thermos of real coffee. Alabama, born and raised son of a Baptist preacher, he'd learned early that kindness wasn't weakness. His father had taught him that, especially now, especially after what happened to Thomas. His younger brother had died at Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. 23 years old, killed by German machine gun fire before he even made it off the sand. Henderson had wanted revenge then. Wanted to hate every German he saw. Wanted to make them pay for Thomas for all of it. But his father's letter had stopped him cold. Son, you're going to see terrible things. You'll be tempted to hate. But hate is what we're fighting against. Show them Christian mercy. That's how you honor your brother, by being better than the enemy. Henderson hadn't understood it then, but he was beginning to now. The fighting had moved on. What remained was the sorting, cataloging what the retreating Wehrmacht had abandoned in their haste to escape the closing American pincers. Standard procedure. Check every building, every boxcar, every cellar. Look for hidden weapons, intelligence documents, stragglers who hadn't gotten the message that the war was over for them. Spread out. Henderson ordered, his voice soft but carrying across the empty yard. 2 men per car. Check everything. Anything unusual you call out. The statistics of collapse surrounded them. In the final months of the war, the German rail network had moved over 400,000 troops and countless tons of material in desperate, futile attempts to reinforce crumbling fronts. Now those same rails carried nothing. Locomotives sat cold and dead. Frayed cars stood abandoned, their contents spilling onto the ground. Private David Ortega, barely 20 years old and still uncomfortable, in a helmet that seemed too large for his head, moved alongside the 7th car in the line. El Paso-born, a blacksmith's son who knew metal and tools better than he knew warfare. He tried the door and found it locked. Not just closed, chained, heavy links wrapped around the exterior handles, secured with a padlock that gleamed dully in the gray morning light. Sergeant Ortega called out, "Got something here." Henderson walked over, his rifle hanging easy at his side. He examined the chain, ran a finger along the cold metal. His brow furrowed. Something wasn't right about this. The Wehrmacht abandoned equipment all the time now. Left tanks, artillery pieces, entire motor pools behind as they fled. But they didn't lock things up and throw away the key. Not unless they were hiding something or leaving something to die. Last week, a booby-trapped boxcar had killed 3 GIs in a fireball that could be seen for miles. Henderson had learned to read situations the way his father read weather back in Alabama. The way clouds gathered before a storm. The way stillness in the air meant something was coming. This felt wrong. "Cut it," Henderson said quietly. Ortega pulled bolt cutters from his pack. The chain snapped with a metallic crack that echoed across the empty yard, sharp as a rifle shot. Birds scattered from a nearby roofline, their wings beating against the silence. Henderson gripped the door handle. The metal was ice cold, burning his palm even through his gloves. He pulled. The door slid open with a grinding screech of rusted wheels, and morning light flooded into the darkness within. The smell hit them first. Not death, thank God, not death, but something almost as terrible. Unwashed bodies, human waste, sickness, and fear given solid form. Ortega stepped back, one hand covering his nose and mouth. And then as Henderson's eyes adjusted to the shadows, he saw them. Shapes. Human shapes. Women huddled against the wooden walls wrapped in torn blankets, staring at him with eyes that expected the worst. 23 women, he would learn later. Most wore torn Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms, the gray-green of nurses, clerks, radio operators. Some had blankets wrapped around their shoulders. Others just sat in the dirty straw that covered the floor, their breath coming out in white clouds in the freezing air. In one corner sat a bucket. That was their toilet. The smell came from there. But Henderson's eyes kept returning to the woman in the center. She was young, maybe mid-20s. Her nurse's uniform was filthy, torn at the shoulder, stained with blood. Whether hers or someone else's, he couldn't tell. Her dark blonde hair hung in matted strands around her face. Dirt streaked her cheeks. Metal shackles bound both wrists. A short chain connected them to a vertical support bar. The chain was too short for her to stand up, fully too short to sit down completely. She was stuck in a half-crouch, her legs trembling from exhaustion from days of maintaining that impossible position. When the door opened and light poured in, the women reacted differently. Some covered their faces as if expecting to be hit. Others just stared, too tired to care. A few whispered to each other in German, their voices barely audible. The chained woman looked up at Henderson. Her eyes were dark, sunken from lack of sleep and food, but they weren't empty. Fear lived there, yes, but also something else. A kind of stubborn defiance. She expected the worst. She'd been told what Americans did to prisoners, especially women. The propaganda had been relentless. By 1945, Joseph Goebbels' ministry was broadcasting warnings 24 hours a day. Americans would torture captured Germans, rape the women, leave them to die in ditches. Better to take cyanide than surrender to the Allies. This woman had believed those warnings. Every German had heard them, seen the posters, listened to the radio broadcasts. Posters showing Americans as apes in uniform. Stories of German women violated and murdered. The constant drumbeat of terror designed to keep Germans fighting even when the war was clearly lost. Now here she was, chained like an animal, and the enemy had found her. She braced herself for what came next, for the cruelty she'd been promised, for the violence that propaganda had guaranteed would come. Henderson stood in the doorway. Behind him, Ortega and the others waited, watching. The sergeant was tall, broad-shouldered, his face weathered by 3 years of war. He'd seen too much. Dead soldiers in frozen foxholes, destroyed cities, refugees walking in endless columns with everything they owned on their backs. But this was different. This was deliberate cruelty. Germans doing this to other Germans. He looked at the chained woman for a long moment. She looked back, waiting. Her breathing was shallow, rapid. Her whole body tensed, ready for pain. Then Henderson did something nobody expected. He lowered his rifle, set it carefully against the doorframe, stepped inside the car slowly, carefully, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. He stopped a few feet from her, crouched down to her eye level, and in simple, clear English, knowing she probably wouldn't understand all the words, but hoping his tone would carry the meaning, he asked a question. "When did you last eat?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Not who are you, not why are you chained, not where are your commanders, just concern about her basic welfare. When did you last eat? The woman, her name was Margaret Brenner, though Henderson didn't know that yet, stared at him. Her lips trembled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. She'd been preparing herself for cruelty, for hatred, for violence. She'd built walls in her mind, preparing for whatever the Americans would do. The propaganda had taught her exactly what to expect. Torture, interrogation, abuse, death. But this question, this simple human concern, it completely broke through those walls. Tears began streaming down her dirty face. Her shoulders shook. She tried to speak, tried to answer, but all that came out was a sob, then another. Then she was crying openly, uncontrollably. All the fear and pain and exhaustion of the past 5 days pouring out in broken sobs. Henderson didn't move. He just stayed there, crouched in front of her, waiting. His face was calm, patient, not threatening. Behind him, Ortega shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't what any of them expected to find today. The other women in the car watched in silence. Some started crying too, not from fear anymore, from something else. Confusion, maybe. Disbelief. This wasn't the enemy they had been promised. In that moment, something shifted, not just for Margaret Brenner, though her world was cracking apart and reforming into something new, but for all 23 women in that cattle car. They'd been taught that Americans were savages, monsters in uniform, butchers who showed no mercy. Instead, here was a man asking about breakfast. After several long minutes, Margaret's crying subsided. She was still trembling, but she'd regained some control. She looked at Henderson through tear-blurred eyes. He was still there, still waiting, still looking at her like she was a person, not an enemy. Henderson stood up slowly, turned to his men. "Ortega, get the bolt cutters," he said quietly. "And someone radio back to command. Tell them we need medical personnel here. Multiple civilian prisoners, at least one in bad shape." He looked back at Margaret. "We're going to get you out of those chains." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. For the first time in 5 days, something other than fear entered her heart. Hope. Ortega moved forward with the bolt cutters. Margaret flinched when he approached her body, going rigid. Henderson held up his hand in a calming gesture. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're going to help you." She didn't understand the words, but his tone was gentle. His movements were slow, careful, not threatening. Ortega positioned the bolt cutters around the chain connecting her shackles to the metal bar. He was careful not to touch her wrists. The blacksmith's son from El Paso had worked with metal his whole life. He knew how to cut without causing harm. One squeeze. The chain snapped. Suddenly, Margaret could move. After 5 days locked in that half-crouch position, she could finally change position. Her legs gave out immediately. She collapsed to the floor of the cattle car, unable to stand. The shackles were still on her wrists, connected by a short length of chain, but at least she wasn't bound to the bar anymore. She sat there shaking, not from cold, from release. Henderson pulled a canteen from his belt. He unscrewed the cap and held it out to her. "Water," he said, gesturing to his mouth. "Drink." She stared at the canteen like it was a miracle. The metal was warm from being against his body. Her hands, shaking badly, reached out and took it. She brought it to her lips. The water was the most beautiful thing she'd ever tasted. She drank carefully, not frantically. Her body knew better than to drink too fast after days without water. But each swallow felt like life returning. She lowered the canteen after a few swallows and looked at Henderson again. Something different was in her eyes now. Not just fear, something else, confusion, disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen. The Americans weren't supposed to be kind. But to understand why that question broke her, you need to know what happened 5 days before that moment. You need to know what the Nazis had promised her about Americans. You need to know why she was in those chains in the first place. 5 days earlier, April 12, 1945, a field hospital outside Munich. Margaret Brenner had been a nurse for 3 years. 25 years old, daughter of a baker from a small town near Stuttgart. She trained at a civilian hospital before the war, back when medicine was about healing, rather than just keeping soldiers alive long enough to send them back to the front. By 1945, she'd seen too much. Wounded boys who should have been in school, men with limbs blown off, burns that covered entire bodies. The endless grinding horror of a war that everyone knew was lost, but no one would admit. She was treating patients that afternoon when SS Captain Klaus Reinhardt walked through the ward. A hard man with cold eyes, the kind who believed in the Reich with religious fervor. The kind who would kill anyone who suggested surrender. Margaret was changing the dressing on a soldier's leg wound. The boy was 17, conscripted 3 months ago, wounded in his first battle. He was crying, asking for his mother. Another nurse, an older woman named Elsa, stood nearby. Margaret spoke quietly, not realizing Reinhardt was close enough to hear. "We should surrender. The war is lost. Why are more boys dying?" Reinhardt's hand fell on her shoulder like a vice. "What did you say?" She turned, saw his uniform, his rank, his expression. Fear flooded through her, but she'd already said it. No taking it back now. "I said the war is lost. We should surrender before more people die." His face went red. Defeatist talk. Traitor to the Reich. Within an hour, she was in handcuffs. Within 2 hours, she was being loaded into a cattle car with 22 other women. Nurses, clerks, radio operators, all accused of the same crime. Defeatism, lack of faith in final victory. Reinhardt personally supervised their imprisonment. He reserved special treatment for Margaret. While the other women were simply locked in, she was chained to the support bar in the center of the car. "You'll learn what happens to traitors," he said, securing the shackles around her wrists. "When the Americans come, they'll show you their true nature. They'll torture you, and you'll die knowing you were wrong about surrender." He left them there, locked the cattle car from the outside, walked away. For 5 days they waited. No food, no water, no relief. The temperature dropped to freezing at night. The women shared body heat to survive, huddling together in their torn blankets. Everyone except Margaret, who couldn't move from the center of the car, couldn't lie down, couldn't sit properly. The bucket in the corner overflowed by the second day. The smell became unbearable. Margaret's wrists bled from the shackles, the metal cutting deeper each time she shifted position. Dehydration set in, hunger gnawed at her constantly. But worse than the physical pain was the fear, the waiting, wondering if they'd die here forgotten, or if the Americans would come and do what Goebbels had promised they'd do. Every German civilian had heard the broadcasts, seen the posters, listened to the constant drumbeat of propaganda about American brutality. Some of it was based on twisted versions of real events. Much of it was pure invention. But repeated often enough, loudly enough, it became truth in people's minds. Americans torture prisoners. Americans show no mercy. Americans are animals in uniform. Margaret had believed it. How could she not? It came from official sources. It was everywhere. The radio, the newspapers, the posters on every wall. To doubt it was to doubt the Reich itself. So when that cattle car door opened and light flooded in, Margaret Brenner wasn't hoping for rescue. She was preparing for death, preparing for the torture she'd been promised, preparing to face the monsters that propaganda had created in her mind. What she got instead changed everything she thought she knew about the enemy, about war, about humanity itself. Henderson crouched there in front of her, waiting patiently while she drank from his canteen. The water tasted clean, pure, better than anything she'd had in months. She took another small sip, then another, being careful not to drink too much too fast. Behind Henderson, other soldiers were helping the remaining 22 women out of the cattle car. Most could walk, though they moved slowly, stiffly, their bodies cramped from days of sitting in the cold. An older woman named Dorothy, 44, mother of 4 sons, all missing, now kept repeating the same phrase in German. "Sie helfen uns." "They're helping us," she said it over and over as if she couldn't quite believe it. A young girl named Hannah, only 19, was terrified. She pulled away from the soldiers, at first covering her face. But when they didn't hurt her, when they just waited patiently with their hands out to help her down, she finally took their hands. Elsa, the nurse who'd been standing near Margaret when she was arrested, had collapsed from dehydration. 2 soldiers made a stretcher from a blanket and carried her out gently, careful not to jostle her too much. Within an hour, more vehicles arrived. A jeep pulled up, and a woman in an American uniform stepped out. Captain Ruth Morrison, 36 years old, from Richmond, Virginia. A no-nonsense woman with kind eyes and capable hands. She'd been an Army nurse for 3 years, seen her share of casualties in field hospitals across France and Germany. Lost her brother James at Guadalcanal back in 1943, which was why she joined in the first place. To honor him, to do something that mattered. But even she paused when she saw the state of these prisoners. "Jesus Christ," she muttered. Then the louder voice taking command. "Okay, let's get them sorted. Anyone unconscious or unable to walk over here." Everyone else were doing basic medical checks. The German women were terrified of her at first. They didn't understand English commands. They assumed the worst. But Morrison had dealt with frightened civilians before. She moved slowly, spoke softly, made sure to show them everything she was doing. A thermometer wasn't a weapon. A stethoscope wasn't a torture device. Just medical equipment. Just a nurse trying to help. She crouched beside Margaret, much like Henderson had done. Noticed the shackles immediately. "We need to get those off," she said, looking at Ortega. "Can you cut them?" "Yes, ma'am," Ortega replied. "But carefully. Her wrists are torn up." The shackles had cut deep into Margaret's wrists. The skin was raw, bleeding in places, infected in others. 5 days of those metal cuffs with no relief had left wounds that would scar permanently. Morrison cleaned the wounds as gently as possible. Margaret still winced at every touch. The captain's face was grim. "Who does this to their own people?" she muttered to Henderson. It took Ortega 15 minutes to carefully cut through the shackles without hurting Margaret further. When the metal finally fell away, Margaret just stared at her freed wrists. She rubbed them gently, feeling the absence of weight. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound this time. By noon, food arrived. The Army field kitchen had prepared hot soup, bread, canned vegetables. Nothing fancy, but it was hot and plentiful. The German women were gathered in a cleared area near the rail yard, sitting on blankets soldiers had laid out. They watched with wide eyes as metal cups of soup were distributed. The smell of food was overwhelming. According to military reports, the average German civilian ration in April 1945 was down to 1,000 calories per day. Many were getting far less. These women hadn't eaten in 4 days. Henderson personally brought a cup to Margaret. She was sitting apart from the others, still looking dazed. When he held out the soup, she didn't take it at first. She just stared at it, then at him. Where was the trick? What did he want in return? "It's okay," Henderson said gently. "Just soup. You need to eat." Finally, she took the cup with both hands. It was warm, the first warm thing she'd held in days. She lifted it to her lips and sipped. The soup was thin, mostly broth with some vegetables and bits of meat. Nothing special by American standards, but to her, it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. She drank slowly at first, then faster. She had to force herself to slow down again. Her stomach, empty for so long, rebelled at the sudden food. She felt nauseous, but she kept drinking. She needed this. Around her, the other women were having similar experiences. Some cried as they ate. Others laughed, short, desperate bursts of laughter that came from relief and disbelief. Dorothy kept repeating her phrase, "They're helping us. They're actually helping us." Everything they'd been told was a lie. The Americans weren't animals. They were just men. Men who gave water to the thirsty and food to the hungry. And that truth was harder to accept than any cruelty would have been. By late afternoon, arrangements were made. The women couldn't stay at the rail yard. It was exposed unsafe with no shelter beyond the damaged cattle car they'd been imprisoned in. A temporary camp had been set up 3 miles away in what used to be a German military barracks. The Wehrmacht had abandoned it during their retreat. Now it served as a holding area for prisoners of war and displaced persons. Trucks arrived to transport the women. Big GMC 6x6s with canvas covers and white stars painted on their sides. The smell of diesel and canvas. The rumble of engines that actually worked, that had fuel that represented the abundance of an army that could afford to waste resources on transporting enemy prisoners. The women climbed aboard slowly, still weak. Margaret was the last aboard. Henderson offered his hand to help her up. She hesitated just for a moment, some last vestige of distrust still lingering. Then she took it. His hand was warm, calloused from work and war. Strong. He pulled her up effortlessly. "Danke," she said quietly in German. "Thank you." Henderson nodded, understanding the tone, if not the words. "You're welcome," he replied. The 3-mile journey passed in silence, broken only by the rumble of truck engines. Margaret sat by the canvas opening, watching the countryside roll past. She'd been sheltered in field hospitals for months, treating the wounded, but never seeing the full extent of Germany's destruction. Now she saw it, all of it. Villages reduced to rubble. Refugees walking in endless columns with belongings piled on carts. Destroyed Wehrmacht convoys abandoned on roadsides, tanks and trucks burned out and useless. Crater fields from artillery that had turned farmland into moonscapes. Other women in the truck whispered among themselves, "Is Germany really this destroyed? What have we done? What will become of us?" Margaret had no answers. She just watched the devastation roll past and wondered how they would ever rebuild from this. How you put a nation back together after it had torn itself apart and dragged the world into hell with it. The barracks appeared ahead, a 2-story brick building, German-built, but now flying an American flag from a pole out front. A white star painted on the water tower. Guard posts at the entrance, but the guards waved them through with casual friendliness rather than menace. And there was a smell, cooking food, real food being prepared for the evening meal. The truck stopped. The women climbed down, looking around with wide, uncertain eyes. Morrison was there, waiting clipboard in hand, organizing everything with efficient compassion. Through a translator, she explained the arrangements. "Each of you gets a bed. We'll bring dinner in 2 hours. There's a washroom down the hall. Please clean up if you can. We'll provide fresh clothes tomorrow. You're prisoners of war under Geneva Convention. That means you'll be treated with dignity." Dignity. That word hung in the air. These women had been chain-starved, abandoned by their own government. Now their enemies were promising dignity. Inside the barracks, the reality exceeded even that promise. Rows of metal frame beds with actual mattresses. Not straw pallets, real mattresses. White sheets that smelled of soap. Wool blankets in olive drab. Pillows with cotton cases. Windows with glass that wasn't broken. Morrison showed them the washroom personally. Sinks with running water. Cold, yes, but running. Functional. Mirrors where they could see themselves for the first time in days. Flush toilets. After 5 days with a bucket that alone felt like luxury. Hooks for towels. Bars of real ivory soap. Even toilet paper. Some of the women began crying again at the sight of it. Simple human necessities that had become luxuries during the war's final collapse. Dorothy touched a mattress with trembling fingers, then sat on it carefully as if afraid it might disappear. The springs creaked under her weight. She lay back, closed her eyes, and tears rolled down her weathered face. Hannah was afraid to sit on her bed at first. It was too clean. She was too dirty. She didn't deserve this. But eventually exhaustion overcame propriety, and she collapsed onto the mattress. Elsa washed her face at one of the sinks, then stared at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the hollow-eyed woman looking back. When had she gotten so thin? When had her hair turned so gray? Margaret chose a bed near a window. She tested the mattress with one hand. Firm but comfortable. She sat on the edge, then lay back slowly. The ceiling was intact. No holes, no water damage. Just a simple white ceiling with a light fixture that probably even worked. For the first time in days, she felt something approaching safe. That evening, as promised, dinner arrived. The mess hall was a separate building, long wooden tables and benches, metal trays and cups. American soldiers ate at their own tables on one side. The German women were directed to tables on the other side. The Army field kitchen was a marvel of organization, a trailer kitchen setup with 2 cooks working efficiently. One of them, Corporal Roy Jenkins from Texas, spoke broken German and tried to make the women feel welcome. But it was the food that spoke louder than any words. The smell hit them first as they entered. Overwhelming, rich, savory, the kind of smells that had disappeared from Germany years ago. Hot soup, chicken vegetable with chunks of real chicken carrots, celery potatoes. Rich golden broth that steamed in the evening air. The kind of soup that represented abundance, that said there was enough chicken to put actual meat in soup instead of just bones for broth. White bread, soft, fresh baked that afternoon in the camp bakery, with real butter, yellow rich melting on the warm bread. Most Germans hadn't seen real butter since 1943. They'd been making do with margarine, then with lard, then with nothing at all. But then came the bacon, 6 strips per person, crispy, glistening with fat. The smell was intoxicating. Smoky, salty, purely American. The visual alone was stunning. Brown and crispy, crackling slightly as it was placed on metal trays. Scrambled eggs made from powder, but still eggs yellow and fluffy, seasoned with salt and pepper. More protein than most Germans had seen in weeks. Canned peaches for dessert, sweet in syrup, bright orange. The concept of dessert had been forgotten during the war. Sugar was for soldiers, not for eating pleasure. And real coffee. Not the ersatz chicory substitute that Germans had been choking down for years. Actual Folgers Army coffee. The smell alone was worth more than gold. The women lined up nervously. The cooks piled food onto their trays. Each woman received a full portion. No rationing, no measuring. Just here, eat, there's plenty. Margaret stared at her tray. More food than she'd seen in 6 months. More food than German civilians received in a week. According to official records, each prisoner was receiving approximately 2,000 calories. German civilians outside were lucky to get 1,000. The women sat at their tables staring at the food in front of them like it might be a mirage. Dorothy picked up a strip of bacon, bit into it. Her eyes widened. Tears started rolling down her face. "Das ist echt," she whispered. "This is real." She couldn't stop crying while she ate. Hannah was afraid at first. What if it was drugged? What if this was some elaborate trick? But watching the others eat, seeing American soldiers eating the same food at their own tables, she finally tried the soup. Then she was eating frantically, shoveling food into her mouth until she had to force herself to slow down. Her stomach wasn't ready for this much food this fast. Elsa ate methodically, carefully, tasting everything slowly. She touched the bread, the bacon, confirming they were real. Ich kann es nicht glauben, she kept whispering. I can't believe it. Margaret sat alone at the end of one table studying her tray. The bacon drew her attention, 6 brown strips arranged precisely. The fat had rendered clear, leaving crispy edges that caught the overhead light. A smell from before the war. Before everything ended, she picked up one strip, held it for a moment, then took a small bite. The taste exploded across her tongue. Fat, salt, smoke, richness. Flavors that had vanished from her life so completely she'd almost forgotten they existed. She chewed slowly, swallowed. The taste lingered, and something broke inside her. Not from sadness this time, from realization, from understanding, from the collapse of everything she'd been taught. This was American bacon, real American bacon. They'd been told Americans were starving, that they had nothing, that they were desperate savages fighting for scraps, that Germany was defending civilization against poverty, stricken barbarians. But this was abundance. This was wealth. This was a nation so rich it could feed its enemies better than Germany fed its own soldiers. Everything, every single thing they'd been told, it was all lies. She began crying, not from pain, not from fear, from the weight of truth crushing down on the foundation of lies. From gratitude she didn't know how to process, from shame for believing the propaganda, from hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward from all this. Across the room, Henderson stood with Morrison watching. He didn't approach, gave Margaret space, but he nodded toward her. Morrison understood. She walked over, sat down beside Margaret. Es ist okay zu essen, Morrison said in careful German. It's okay to eat. Morrison had learned conversational German from her Stuttgart-born grandmother, enough to communicate basic comfort. Margaret looked at her through tear-filled eyes. Meine Mutter hungert, she said. My mother is starving. Morrison's face softened with compassion. Ich weiß, she replied. I know. Aber du hungerst hilft dir nicht. But you starving doesn't help her. Margaret knew she was right. Intellectually, she understood. But the guilt was crushing. Every bite of bacon felt like a betrayal. Her father was dead. Her brother probably dead. Her mother eating grass from the town square. And here she sat with more food than she knew what to do with. But Morrison's words echoed in her mind. You starving doesn't help her. The only way to help her mother eventually would be to survive, to heal, to get strong enough to go home and rebuild. So Margaret forced herself to eat. The bacon, the eggs, the bread with butter, the soup, the peaches, the coffee. Each bite was delicious and devastating in equal measure. That night, lying in her clean bed under warm blankets, Margaret couldn't sleep. She kept seeing that breakfast, tasting the bacon, smelling the coffee. Her stomach was full for the first time in weeks. She should have felt satisfied. Instead, she felt confused. If they lied about the food, what else did they lie about? The days began to form a pattern. Wake at 6 with a bell, not harsh or jarring, just a wake-up call. The women stumbled out of bed, still half expecting this to be a dream they'd wake from. Roll call at 6:30. In the yard, but not military harsh. Morrison would count them, make sure everyone was healthy and accounted for. Just accountability, she explained through the translator. We need to know everyone's okay. Then breakfast at 7. And every morning, every single morning, there was bacon. Monday morning, oatmeal with brown sugar, 6 strips of bacon, toast with strawberry jam, real coffee, orange juice from concentrate. The women couldn't believe it the first morning. Surely this was special, a one-time thing. But Tuesday came, scrambled eggs, bacon again, never skipped. 6 perfect strips, biscuits with butter, coffee, apple slices. Wednesday, pancakes with syrup, bacon, coffee, canned pears. The pattern became undeniable. Bacon every day, every single day. A symbol of American abundance that the women couldn't deny no matter how much propaganda they'd absorbed. By the end of the first week, the women's attitudes had shifted. Day 1, they couldn't believe it. Day 3, they ate eagerly. Day 5, they started to smile. Day 7, they laughed together at the breakfast table. Dorothy would shake her head in wonder. In Germany, bacon was a memory, a luxury from before the war. Here the Americans treated it as routine, standard breakfast fare. Work assignments came at 8. Margaret was assigned to the infirmary due to her nursing background. Dorothy helped in the kitchen, loving the work with food. Hannah was given laundry duty quiet work that suited her shy nature. Elsa also worked in the infirmary. Lunch at noon, soup, sandwiches, fruit. Always enough. The concept of seconds being available blew their minds. In Germany, you got your ration, and if you were still hungry, you stayed hungry. Here, if you wanted more, you could have more. Dinner at 6, meat, vegetables, bread. Often American staples they'd never encountered before. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and frequently pie for dessert. Apple pie, cherry pie. The idea of wasting sugar and fruit on dessert when people were starving seemed obscene. But it also demonstrated a truth they couldn't escape. America had so much they could afford to be wasteful. In the infirmary, Margaret worked under Morrison's supervision. The captain was impressed by her skills. Despite everything she'd been through, the young German nurse was competent, careful, compassionate with patients. "You're good at this," Morrison told her one afternoon watching as Margaret expertly bandaged a soldier's wound. They communicated through a mix of simple English, basic German, and hand gestures. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. "Thank you," Margaret said in careful English. She was picking up words quickly, especially medical terms, which often had Latin roots. The infirmary treated both American soldiers with minor ailments and German prisoners of war who were wounded or sick. Margaret found herself in the strange position of treating German soldiers under American supervision. One of her patients was a young corporal named Franz Wober, 22 years old with a leg wound. He'd been captured the same day as the women. He was terrified of the Americans, convinced they'd torture him or execute him eventually. Margaret changed his dressings while he lay rigid with fear. "They're not what we were told," she said to him quietly in German. "I've been here a week. They feed us 6 strips of bacon every morning. Real bacon. They haven't hurt anyone." "The propaganda lied, Franz." Franz looked at her with haunted eyes. "How can I believe that? You're probably working for them now, collaborating." Margaret felt anger flash through her. "I was chained in a cattle car for 5 days by our own SS, left to die by Germans. These Americans freed me, fed me, gave me medical care. Who's the enemy, Franz?" He had no answer for that. But over the following days, watching how the Americans treated him, seeing the food they gave him, witnessing the medical care they provided, his certainty began to crack. In the second week, Morrison gave Margaret a gift. A small thing but meaningful. A pack of Wrigley's spearmint gum. 5 sticks. For after meals, Morrison explained, freshens breath. Margaret had never had chewing gum before. She tried it that evening tentatively. The sweet, minty flavor flooded her mouth. She chewed carefully, amazed that the flavor lasted, that Americans had invented something this frivolous and wonderful. She shared the gum with the other women that night. Each took a stick, chewed it with wonder. Hannah giggled at the texture. Dorothy closed her eyes and savored the sweetness. "This is what Americans give away for free," Elsa marveled. "Just give away." While we were told they had nothing, the gum became a symbol, like the bacon, like the coffee, proof that everything they'd been taught was backwards. America wasn't poor. Germany wasn't superior. The whole foundation of the Reich's ideology was built on lies. Week 3 brought the letters. The Red Cross had been working to restore mail service to reconnect families torn apart by war. It was spotty, unreliable, but slowly messages were getting through. The women gathered in the yard when an American soldier appeared with a mail bag. He called out names. Each name call was met with held breath from all the women. Would it be good news or bad? Dorothy Schneider. Dorothy stepped forward, hands shaking, took the letter. It was from a neighbor, not family. She opened it right there, read it, then collapsed. 2 other women caught her. The letter confirmed what she'd feared. All 4 of her sons were dead, killed on the Eastern Front. Her husband had died in the Berlin bombing. She had nothing, no one. The neighbor's letter ended with an offer. "Come home. I'll take care of you." It was kindness, but it couldn't fill the void of losing everyone. Hannah Klein. Hannah's letter was from her mother. Her father had been arrested by the Gestapo in 1944 and never returned. Their home was destroyed. Her mother was living with her sister in the ruins. Please come home, the letter said. You're all I have left. Elsa Hartman received a letter from a cousin. The family farm was intact miraculously, but there were no men left to work it. We need you, the cousin wrote. Everyone else is gone. Then came the name that Margaret had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Margaret Brenner. She took the letter with trembling hands. The paper was rough, poor quality. The handwriting was shaky, her mother's handwriting. Margaret sat on a bench and read, Dearest Maggie, I don't know if you're alive. I don't know if this will reach you, but I have to try. Your father is dead, killed in the March 12th air raid. The bakery is gone. Everything we built gone in fire and rubble. Your brother Stefan was conscripted last November. 16 years old, sent to the Eastern Front. We've heard nothing since January. The Reich doesn't confirm deaths anymore. There are too many, but I know, a mother knows. I'm living in a basement with 5 other families. No heat, no electricity, no food. Yesterday I ate grass from the square. Today I found old potatoes in rubble. Tomorrow I don't know. The French occupy our town now. They're not cruel, but they don't help. Everyone is starving. If you're alive, please come home. I have no one. Nothing. I'm 48, but I look 70. The mirror doesn't lie when I can find one. Your mother, Clara. Margaret read the letter 3 times. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the paper. Tears streamed down her face, but she made no sound. Her father was dead. Her brother was dead. Her mother was eating grass while Margaret had eaten 6 strips of bacon that morning. Eggs, toast with butter, real coffee. The guilt was overwhelming, crushing. How could she sit here comfortable and fed while her mother starved, while Germany collapsed into ruins, while everything burned? That evening, Margaret didn't go to dinner. She couldn't. The thought of food made her nauseous. She sat on her bed, holding the letter, staring at nothing. Morrison noticed her absence. Found her in the barracks. Maggie, warum hast du nicht gegessen? Morrison asked in her careful German. Why didn't you eat? Margaret showed her the letter without speaking. Morrison read it slowly, her face growing sad. I'm sorry, Morrison said. I truly am. War is hell for everyone. She sat down beside Margaret on the bed. But listen to me. Your mother wouldn't want you to starve. Mothers never do. I lost my brother at Guadalcanal 3 years ago, when I heard I couldn't eat for days, couldn't sleep, felt guilty for being alive when he was dead. My mother wrote me. She said Ruth James died so you could live. Honor him by living well, not by dying slowly. Your mother is suffering, yes, but you starving yourself won't help her. It won't bring back your father or brother. It won't feed her. What it will do is kill you, and then she'll have lost everyone. Stay strong, heal, survive. Maybe someday you can help her, but not if you're dead. Margaret looked at Morrison through tears. How do I live with this guilt by being worthy of the gift you have been given? You were supposed to die in that cattle car. The SS left you there to die, but you survived. That's not nothing. Now you have a choice. Waste that survival or use it. Help others. Rebuild when you go home. Make sure this never happens again. That's how you honor the ones who didn't make it. The words made sense. Terrible, painful sense. Margaret returned to meals the next day, but the guilt remained a constant weight she carried with every bite of bacon. Week 4 brought a different kind of challenge, not from outside, but from within their own group. Among the 23 women, one remained unconvinced by American kindness. Her name was Greta Vogel, 32 years old, a former leader in the League of German Girls, the female branch of the Hitler Youth. She'd spent her adult life teaching Nazi ideology to young girls, spreading the gospel of German superiority and racial purity. Greta was a true believer, and true believers don't surrender their faith easily even when confronted with evidence. She'd been eating the American food, sleeping in the American beds, accepting the American medical care. But she refused to accept what it meant. Instead, she constructed an elaborate explanation that preserved her worldview. It's a trick, she told the other women. Don't you see they're fattening us up before interrogation, making us soft, compliant, breaking down our resistance with false kindness? The bacon, the beds, the medicine, it's all calculated. Psychological warfare. They want us to forget we're Germans, to become traitors to the Reich. Real Germans would resist, would refuse their food, would stay loyal to the Führer even in captivity. Some of the younger women wavered when they heard this. A lifetime of Nazi education was hard to shake. Greta's certainty was seductive. It was easier than questioning everything you'd been taught. But most of the women had moved beyond that. They'd tasted the bacon, felt the clean sheets, experienced genuine kindness. They knew what they knew. The confrontation came on a Tuesday evening. The women were in the barracks after dinner. Margaret was writing a letter to her mother, trying to find words of comfort when she had so little to offer beyond, "I'm alive and I'm coming home." Greta approached her bed, stood over her with arms crossed. "Look at you," Greta said, her voice dripping with contempt. "Their little pet, eating their food, speaking their language, working in their hospital. You're a collaborator, a traitor to Germany." Margaret set down her pen, looked up calmly. "I'm alive, Greta, which is more than I can say for everyone the Reich abandoned. You were weak. That's why you broke. Strong Germans resist." Something snapped inside Margaret. The guilt she'd been carrying, the grief over her father and brother, the anger at a regime that had destroyed everything. It all came pouring out. She stood up facing Greta directly. "Strong Germans, is that what we call the SS officer who chained me and left me to die? Is that what we call the regime that's starving my mother while I eat bacon in an American camp?" The other women in the barracks stopped what they were doing, watched. Greta's face reddened. "The Americans are the enemy. No, Greta. The Americans freed me, fed me, healed my wounds, gave me dignity when I had none. The only people who tried to kill me were Germans. I spent 5 days in that cattle car, expecting American brutality. You know what I got? A soldier who asked when I last ate, who gave me water, who treated me like a human being. Our own government treated us like animals, locked us in cattle cars, left us to freeze and starve. And you want to call them the enemy. You don't understand." Greta started. "I understand perfectly. I understand that everything we were told was a lie, every single thing. Americans aren't savages. They're not starving. They're not desperate. They have so much abundance, they feed their enemies better than we fed our soldiers. And I'm done believing lies." The barracks was silent. Dorothy nodded slowly. Hannah was crying quietly. Elsa looked relieved that someone had finally said it. Greta opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. Her certainty was cracking. Not broken yet, but fractured. She walked away without another word. That confrontation marked a shift in the group. The women who'd been wavering chose their side. Most aligned with Margaret. A few still clung to Greta, but their voices grew quieter each day. Because the evidence kept mounting. The bacon kept coming. The kindness continued. And it was impossible to maintain denial in the face of daily proof. Week 5 brought an unexpected visitor. Margaret was working in the infirmary changing bed linens when an American soldier walked in for treatment. Staff Sergeant James Cooper, 28 years old, recently liberated from a German POW camp. He needed minor treatment for an old shrapnel wound that was acting up. Margaret looked up as he entered, froze. Her hands went still on the sheet she was smoothing. She recognized him, and he recognized her. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Cooper spoke, his voice uncertain. You're the nurse, from Munich. You saved my leg." The memory flooded back. December 1944, the field hospital where she'd worked before being arrested. They'd brought in American and British prisoners, wounded men who needed medical care. Most of the German staff had treated them with minimum effort, following orders but doing no more than absolutely necessary. Some had been actively cruel, seeing it as payback for German soldiers killed by Allied forces. But Margaret couldn't do it. Her Hippocratic oath was sacred to her. She was a nurse. Her duty was to heal, not to judge. Cooper had arrived with a shrapnel wound in his leg. Infected. Festering. The German doctor had looked at it and said, "Let it fester. He's the enemy. Let him lose the leg." But Margaret had disagreed, quietly. When she was alone with him, she'd cleaned the wound properly, used precious sulfa powder without authorization, changed his dressings daily with care and attention. She'd saved his leg, possibly his life. They couldn't communicate back then. He spoke no German. She spoke no English. But kindness needs no translation. He'd seen it in her actions. The gentle way she handled his wound, the extra care she took when no one was watching. Before he was transferred to a POW camp, he'd tried to thank her. She just nodded, smiled slightly. It was enough. Now here they were. 9 months later, their positions reversed. She was the prisoner. He was free. Morrison brought a translator. The conversation that followed changed everything. "You saved my leg," Cooper said through the translator. "The infection was bad. The doctor wanted to let it go. But you fought for me. Used medicine you weren't supposed to waste on prisoners." Margaret's English had improved enough that she understood most of it. She responded haltingly. "I remember. You American prisoner. I nurse. My duty to heal." Cooper shook his head. "It was more than duty. The other nurses wouldn't touch us, wouldn't even look at us like we were human. But you did. You showed compassion when you could have just followed orders. I thought about you a lot in the Stalag. Wondered if you survived the war. Hoped you did, because you showed me something important." What Margaret asked. That not all Germans were monsters. Just like he gestured around the infirmary, not all Americans are savages. We were lied to about each other. Both sides. They told us you were all Nazis, fanatics, evil, subhuman, but you proved that wrong. You saved my life when you could have let me die, when it would have been easier to let me die, when you might have gotten in trouble for helping me. I was told that all Germans were monsters. You proved that was a lie. Margaret felt tears welling up. And I was told all Americans were monsters, that you would torture prisoners, rape women, show no mercy. Instead, she struggled for the English words a sergeant asked when I last ate. Gave me water, fed me bacon, treated me like a person. We were both lied to. Cooper nodded. Yeah, we were. But here's what they couldn't control. Individual people choosing kindness. That's stronger than any propaganda. The conversation continued for nearly an hour. Morrison listened fascinated. This was the heart of it. The reason the war had to end, not just with military victory, but with understanding, with the recognition that people on both sides were human. Before Cooper left, Morrison had an idea. That evening, she asked him to speak to all 23 women and to share his perspective. The women gathered in the common area. Cooper stood at the front, Morrison translating his words. I was captured in France, September 1944, wounded, scared. I'd been told Germans tortured prisoners, killed them slowly, made them suffer. Instead, I was taken to a field hospital. Most of the staff ignored me, a few were cruel, but one nurse, this nurse, he gestured to Margaret, treated me like a human being. She risked punishment to help me. Why? Because she took an oath, to heal, not to judge. In the Stalag, conditions were bad. We were hungry, cold, scared, but the guards followed Geneva Convention. We weren't tortured. We got food, not much, but some. We weren't executed. Then I was liberated by American troops. And you know what shocked me? How they treated German prisoners. With the same Geneva Convention rules they demanded for me. They fed them, gave them medical care, didn't abuse them, because that's what we do. That's what makes us different. Not that we're perfect. We're not. But we try to hold to principles even when it's hard. Even when the enemy doesn't deserve it. Even when we're tired and angry and we've lost friends. He paused, looking directly at Greta. I hear some of you think this kindness is a trick. It's not. This is just who they are. Who we are. You've been taught to hate Americans. I was taught to hate Germans. But individual people like that nurse proved the hate was based on lies. You have a choice now. Keep believing the lies, or accept the truth sitting in front of you on a breakfast plate every morning. The women sat in silence when he finished. Many were crying, some were nodding. Even Greta looked shaken, though she said nothing. That night, lying in her bed, Margaret thought about Cooper's words. Individual people choosing kindness. That was the thread that ran through everything. Henderson asking when she'd eaten. Morrison explaining that her starvation wouldn't help her mother. Cooper thanking her for an act of compassion 9 months ago. Individual choices. Small moments of humanity. They added up. They mattered. They were more powerful than propaganda. More lasting than empires. Week 6 brought the reckoning. Late May 1945. The war in Europe had been over for weeks. Germany had surrendered unconditionally on May 8th. But the full horror of what the Reich had done was still being revealed. American officers gathered all the German prisoners in the camp. Not just the 23 women, but all the German POWs. Nearly 200 people total. They were brought to the main hall where chairs had been arranged. A projector was set up at the back. A white sheet hung on the wall at the front. An American colonel stood before them, spoke through a translator. "We're going to show you something. Some of you won't want to see it. Some of you will think it's propaganda. But I promise you every frame is real. This was filmed by our soldiers, and British soldiers, and Soviet soldiers. This is what your government did. What was done in your name, whether you knew or not." The lights went out. The projector started clicking. For the next 45 minutes, they watched footage from the liberated concentration camps. Bergen-Belsen. Mountains of corpses. Thousands of bodies stacked like cordwood. British soldiers using bulldozers to push them into mass graves because there were too many to bury by hand. Dachau. American soldiers walking through. Living skeletons with hollow eyes. Men and women who weighed 60 or 70 pounds but were somehow still alive. Children who looked like old people. Eyes that had seen hell. Auschwitz-Birkenau. Soviet footage. Gas chambers disguised as showers. Crematorium ovens still containing bones. The systematic industrial machinery of murder. Piles of belongings, mountains of shoes, tens of thousands of pairs. Suitcases with names written on them. Eyeglasses sorted into bins. Human hair tones of it shaved from victims before they were murdered. Gold teeth extracted from corpses. The statistics appeared on screen. 6 million Jews murdered, 5 million others. Roma, disabled, political prisoners, Soviet POWs, homosexuals, 11 million total dead in the camps. The largest organized mass murder in human history. The footage showed American and British soldiers forcing German civilians from nearby towns to walk through the camps, to see what had been done in their names. Women vomiting at the sight, men turning away unable to look, children crying. And the Germans in those films kept saying the same thing. "Wir wussten nicht." We didn't know. In the darkened hall, the German prisoners watched. Some covered their faces. Others vomited. A few fainted and had to be carried out. Dorothy collapsed completely unconscious from shock. Hannah sobbed uncontrollably, her hands over her mouth. Young women who'd believed in the Reich with pure hearts now saw what that belief had enabled. Greta stared at the screen, her face pale as death, her mouth hanging open. All her certainty, all her ideology, all her faith in the Reich's righteousness, it was burning away in the light of undeniable truth. Margaret watched everything, forced herself not to look away. Tears streamed down her face, but she kept her eyes open, kept watching, bore witness to what her silence had allowed, because she had heard whispers. They all had. Jewish families disappearing in the night, deportations to the east, rumors of camps, smoke from chimneys that smelled wrong. But it was easier not to ask, easier to focus on your own problems, easier to tell yourself surely it couldn't be as bad as people said, easier to believe the official explanations, work camps, resettlement, necessary security measures, easier to stay silent. And silence was complicity. Not acting was a choice. She understood that now. Understood it with crushing clarity. When the lights came back on, the hall was absolutely silent. The kind of silence that follows a death. The death of innocence. The death of deniability. Someone whispered in German. "Wir wussten nicht." The American colonel's voice cut through the silence. Maybe you didn't know the extent. Maybe you didn't see inside the camps. But people knew. Your neighbors knew. Your police knew. Your government knew. And they did nothing. Some of you might still think this is propaganda, but ask yourselves, why would we fabricate millions of bodies? Why would British soldiers, Soviet soldiers, all independently film the same horrors? You can deny it if you want, but you can never say you didn't know. Not anymore. The Germans filed out slowly. No one spoke. Some were still crying. Most were in shock. The world they'd known, the nation they'd believed in, it had been built on an ocean of blood. That night, the barracks was different. The women who'd still defended the Reich, who'd insisted Germany had been right, were silent now. Some still tried to claim the footage was fake, but their voices were weak, uncertain. They didn't even convince themselves. Greta sat on her bed, staring at nothing. Margaret approached her, sat down beside her, offering an olive branch despite everything. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Greta's voice came out broken and small. I believed everything they told me. I taught it to young girls in the League, told them Jews were subhuman, told them Germany was destined to rule, told them the Führer was saving civilization. I spread lies, poisoned minds. How many girls believed me? How many still believe? Tears rolled down her face. Those children in the films, how could they murder children? How Margaret had no answer. No one did. There was no answer that made it bearable. I was part of this, Greta continued. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't work in the camps. But I helped create the world that made the camps possible. With my teaching, my certainty, my refusal to question. How do I live with that? Margaret thought of Morrison's words, Henderson's kindness, Cooper's testimony about individual choices. The same way I do, she said quietly, by making sure it never happens again, by telling the truth, by never staying silent again. We chose not to see, not to ask, not to question. That's on us. We can't change it, but we can make sure the next generation knows what happens when people stop asking questions, when they accept cruelty as necessary, when they dehumanize other people. Greta looked at her. Will anyone listen to us? They'll have to, because we were there. We saw what hate creates, and we saw what kindness can do. We saw both, and now we have to choose which one will carry forward. They sat together in silence, two women who'd believed different lies but arrived at the same truth, that the only way forward was through honest reckoning, through refusing to look away, through the hard work of building something better from the ruins. The next morning, Margaret sought out Henderson, found him outside the headquarters building, preparing for his eventual return to the States. She needed to ask him something that had been burning in her mind since she'd seen that footage. Sergeant Henderson, she said in her improving English, may I speak with you? He turned, smiled. Of course, you can call me Bill. She sat down beside him on a bench, gathered her thoughts. I watched the film. From the camps. Henderson nodded, his face somber. Rough, wasn't it? I don't understand. How do you forgive after seeing that? How can you feed us? Be kind to us after what my country did. Henderson was quiet for a long moment, lit a cigarette, offered her one. She declined. I don't forgive what was done, he said finally. I can't. Nobody can. Those people who died, they deserve justice, not forgiveness. The people who did that, they'll answer to God and to courts. But you, he looked at her directly, you didn't do that. You didn't even know about it. But I should have known. I should have asked questions. I should have. You should have. Yes, all of you should have. But you didn't. None of you did. And you can't change that now. What you can do is make sure it never happens again. You can make sure you never stay silent again. You can rebuild Germany into something better than what it was. That's the only way forward. But how can you be kind to us after everything? Henderson took a long drag on his cigarette. My father's a preacher, small church in Alabama. Before I shipped out, he told me something I didn't understand then. But I do now. He said the words kept coming back to me. Show them mercy, not because they deserve it, but because you do. Because holding on to hate will poison you worse than any enemy bullet. I lost my brother at Normandy, Thomas. He was 23, best man I ever knew. Killed on that beach by German machine guns. When I heard, I wanted revenge. Wanted to kill every German I saw. Make them hurt like I was hurting. But my father wrote me another letter. He said Thomas died so you could live free. Honor him by being better than the enemy. Show them what America really is. Not through cruelty, through mercy. So when I opened that cattle car and saw you chained, starving, terrified, I had a choice. I could have walked away, left you there, said that's what you deserve for what your country did to my brother. But that wouldn't honor Thomas. That wouldn't make me better than the SS officer who chained you. That would just make me another person choosing cruelty. So I asked when you last ate, because everyone deserves to eat, even enemies, even Germans, even prisoners. That's what makes us American. That's what makes us different. We don't abandon our principles when they're hard. We hold to them, especially when they're hard. You're a person. a human being. You deserve kindness. That's all I needed to know. Margaret was crying now. Your brother, I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry, be better. That's how you honor the dead, by building something better than what came before. In that moment, Margaret understood. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing evil. It was about refusing to let evil define you. The Americans didn't feed her because Germany deserved it. They fed her because they refused to become the monsters they were fighting. That afternoon, Greta found Margaret. The transformation was visible. The rigid certainty was gone. In its place was something raw and painful, but ultimately more human. You were right, Greta said. About everything. I'm sorry. They talked for hours about what they'd believed, what they'd done, how they'd helped create a world where such horrors were possible. About how to live with that knowledge, and about how to move forward. Because standing still, drowning in guilt, that helped no one. The only redemption available was in the doing, in the building, in the refusing to ever be silent again. Week 7 brought news of repatriation. The war in Japan was winding toward its inevitable conclusion. Europe was being divided into occupation zones. The process of sending prisoners home was beginning. Early November 1945. The leaves had turned brown and fallen. Winter was coming again. Margaret was called to the administration office. An American officer sat behind a desk, paperwork spread before him. Through Morrison, who'd come to translate, he explained, Margaret Brenner, we've confirmed your mother is alive in Kirchberg near Stuttgart. You're cleared for repatriation. No war crimes charges. Transport leaves next week. Margaret should have felt joy, relief. Instead, she felt a strange hollowness. This camp, these Americans, they'd become familiar, safe. Outside was the unknown, the destroyed homeland, the hungry mother, the weight of rebuilding. Morrison walked with her back to the barracks. I have something for you, the captain said. She handed Margaret an envelope. Inside was a typed letter on official U.S. Army Medical Corps stationery. To whom it may concern, it read, Margaret Brenner served as a nurse under my supervision for 6 months. She demonstrated exceptional skill, compassion, and professionalism. She is an excellent nurse and a good person. Germany will need people like her in the years ahead. I recommend her without reservation. Captain Ruth Morrison, U.S. Army Medical Corps. There was also a handwritten list, addresses of aid organizations, Red Cross offices, refugee services, resources for rebuilding. Why are you helping me? Margaret asked. Because that's what we do. Morrison said simply, we help people rebuild. That evening, Margaret sought out Henderson one final time. He was packing his duffel, preparing to ship out to Alabama in a few days. Bill, she said. His name felt strange on her tongue, intimate and foreign at once. He turned. Maggie, you got your papers? She nodded. I leave next week. Good, that's good. You should go home. She pulled something from her pocket, a white handkerchief. Over the past week, she'd embroidered it with careful stitches during quiet evenings. White thread on white fabric, subtle but there. The words read, When did you last eat? Thank you for seeing me as human. MB, 1945. I made this for you, she said, holding it out. So you remember. Henderson took it carefully, unfolded it, read the words. His eyes grew wet. I'll keep this forever, he said quietly. Why did you ask me? She said suddenly. That first day, when you found me in chains. Why did you ask when I ate? Henderson smiled slightly. Because you looked hungry, that's all. And because everyone deserves to eat, even prisoners, even enemies. The uniform doesn't change that. The nationality doesn't change that. You were a human being in pain. That's all I needed to know. Margaret felt tears on her face. Different tears this time. Not grief, not guilt, something else. Gratitude, understanding, hope. Go rebuild Germany, Maggie Henderson said. Make it something better. Show them that kindness isn't weakness. That freedom creates abundance. That people matter more than empires. I will, she whispered. I promise. They shook hands, formal but meaningful, both understanding that this moment, this goodbye, was the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The journey home took 3 days. Margaret traveled with other repatriated women. Dorothy was heading to her nephew's farm, Hannah to her mother in Stuttgart, Greta to Munich to face whatever consequences awaited her confession of BDM activities. The train passed through devastated German cities. Frankfurt, 70% destroyed, but people were clearing rubble, rebuilding. A bakery had reopened in a damaged building, smoke rising from a makeshift oven. Mannheim, the cathedral spire still stood amid ruins, a symbol of something that survived. Stuttgart, Margaret's stop. The city was a ghost of itself, but there were signs of life. Markets with limited goods, schools holding classes in damaged buildings, people working, not giving up. Kirchberg appeared in late afternoon, the small town where she'd grown up, where her father had baked bread, where she'd learned to ride a bicycle and fallen in love with nursing and believed in a Reich that promised glory. The main street was rubble. The church was destroyed. Her father's bakery was a crater, but some buildings stood. The town hall damaged but functional. Houses with makeshift repairs. People living, surviving, continuing. She found her mother in the basement of a collapsed building. 6 families sharing the space. No heat, no electricity, water from a communal pump 3 blocks away. Clara Brenner was skeletal, gray hair thin and brittle, face lined with suffering. 48 years old but looking 70. She was sorting through a small pile of potatoes when Margaret appeared in the doorway. Clara looked up, squinted in the dim light. Her eyes widened. Maggie, Mama. They held each other, both crying. The basement's other occupants watched, understanding this reunion. Everyone had lost someone. Everyone was waiting for someone to come home. That night, Margaret shared what she'd brought. Bread from the American camp, canned meat, a precious bar of chocolate she'd saved, real coffee. The other families in the basement stared. Margaret divided everything, shared it all. This is what they taught me, she thought. Abundance is meant to be shared. Where did you get this? Clara whispered, holding the coffee like treasure. The Americans, Margaret said. They fed us every day. Bacon for breakfast, meat for dinner, more food than I've seen in years. Clara was quiet for a long moment. How were they, the Americans, were they cruel? Margaret could have lied. It would have been easier. But she'd promised herself. No more silence. Only truth. No, Mama. They were kind. They freed me from chains, fed me, gave me medical care, treated me with dignity. They treated me better than our own government ever did. Clara didn't speak for a full minute. Then quietly, we were lied to about that too, along with everything else. Winter 1945 passed into spring 1946. The hardest winter in German memory. Starvation widespread, freezing temperatures. Infrastructure collapsed. Margaret found work in a makeshift hospital. A damaged school building converted to medical use. Conditions were terrible. Limited supplies, no heat, not enough staff, overwhelming need. But she worked tirelessly, using the techniques Morrison had taught her. American triage methods, efficiency protocols, compassionate care for everyone. She treated frostbite, malnutrition, disease, wounds from war still healing. She treated Germans and French occupation soldiers and displaced persons from across Europe. One day in March 1946, a patient arrived, a man, mid-30s, leg infection. He gave a false name, but Margaret recognized him. Heinrich Vogel, Greta's distant cousin, SS officer, hiding from war crimes investigators. He'd participated in rounding up Jewish families in 1943, loading them onto trains, sending them east. He begged Margaret not to report him. She faced a choice. The Hippocratic Oath. Treat all patients, but also justice. This man had done terrible things. She thought of Henderson, of Morrison, of Cooper, of mercy and accountability. I'll save your life, she told Heinrich. That's my oath. But you'll face justice for what you did. That's society's obligation. She treated his infection, then reported him to French authorities. Mercy doesn't mean no accountability, she explained to a young nurse watching. It means not becoming a murderer myself. I can heal his wound without forgiving his crimes. That's the standard. That's what it means to be better than the evil we fight. 1948. Germany slowly rebuilding. Marshall Plan, aid flowing in. Currency reform stabilizing the economy. Hope tentative but real returning. Margaret, now 28, met a man, Thomas Weber, 31 years old, a teacher who'd lost his leg in the war. He came to the hospital for phantom pain treatment. They talked during his sessions about the war, about guilt, about building something better. He'd been a Wehrmacht soldier, captured in France, spent 2 years in an American POW camp. His experience mirrored hers, American kindness when cruelty was expected. They married in a quiet ceremony, the rebuilt church still missing its steeple but functional, a reception with bread, cheese, and real coffee. A luxury now available again, 1950. Their daughter was born, 7 pounds 3 ounces, healthy, perfect. They named her Anna, a new beginning. Margaret cried holding her, the first tears of pure joy since before the war. This tiny life represented everything they were building. Hope, future, redemption through creation. 1952. A son, Peter, 8 pounds, strong and loud. Their family was complete. 1955. Germany transformed. The Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle in full swing. Kirchberg had been rebuilt. New buildings where craters had been. The bakery reopened not by her family, but symbolic nonetheless. The church had a new steeple. Schools functioned normally. The economy grew. Margaret was head nurse at Stuttgart Hospital, overseeing a staff of 40, respected for skill and compassion, known for treating everyone equally. Rich, poor, German, foreign, it didn't matter. Everyone deserved care. 1963. Anna was 13, Peter was 11, old enough to understand. They asked about the war. All German children eventually did. It hung over everything that passed, unspoken but always present. Margaret told them everything. The cattle car, the chains, the fear, the sergeant who asked when she ate, the bacon breakfast, the American kindness, the Holocaust films, the shame and guilt, the choice to rebuild. How could Germans do that, Anna asked. Kill children by stopping asking questions, Margaret said, by accepting what they were told, by staying silent when they should have spoken. That's the lesson I need you to learn. Never stop questioning, never accept cruelty as normal, never dehumanize people, even your enemies. But weren't the Americans our enemies, Peter asked. They were, and they had every reason to hate us, but they chose kindness instead. That choice, that simple choice to ask about breakfast instead of seeking revenge, that changed everything. I was prepared for cruelty. I had no defense against kindness. It broke me. And in breaking me, it freed me. From what Anna asked, from hate, from propaganda, from lies, from thinking enemies aren't human. The Americans showed me that people are people, no matter what uniform, no matter what flag. That's what I want you to remember, always. Her children grew up with these values. Anna became a teacher, Peter a doctor, both carrying forward the lessons. Question authority, defend human dignity, show kindness to enemies, never stay silent against injustice. 1967, 22 years after liberation. Margaret, now 47, saw an announcement in the newspaper. American veterans were returning to Bavaria for a memorial dedication, a monument to Allied liberation. One name on the list caught her eye, William Henderson, Alabama, USA. She brought her family. Husband Thomas, Anna, now 17, Peter 15. The ceremony was held near the former campsite. Hundreds gathered. German officials, American veterans, former prisoners, families. Margaret searched the crowd, then saw him. Henderson, now 51, gray in his hair, reading glasses, but the same kind eyes. Bill, she called out. He turned, stared, then smiled a huge, genuine smile. Maggie, they embraced, appropriate, respectful, but warm. You look good, he said. Healthy, happy, I am. Thanks to you. Henderson's family approached. His wife Mary, 49, from Alabama. 3 children. Sue, 22, Thomas Jr., 19, Sarah, 16. Margaret introduced her family. Thomas, Anna, Peter. The families met, talked, shared stories. Anna approached Henderson. You're the sergeant, the one who asked my mother when she ate. I am, Henderson said. She tells that story all the time. Says it changed her life. It was just a question, just basic human decency. It was everything, Margaret said. They talked for over an hour about the years since, about rebuilding, about the choices that define us. Did you ever find your brother, Henderson asked? Stefan. Margaret shook her head. Confirmed dead, Eastern Front, January 1945. He was 16. I'm sorry, my mother survived until 1962, got to meet her grandchildren. Died peacefully. That's more than many had. And you? What did you do? Nursing. Head of Stuttgart Hospital now. I train young nurses, teach them what you taught me. What's that? That kindness is strength. That mercy isn't weakness. That how we treat enemies defines who we are more than how we treat friends. Henderson smiled. Good. That's good. Peter asked the question Margaret had asked all those years ago. What made you ask that question? When you found my mother, she looked hungry. Henderson said simply, that's all I needed to know. That's simple. Peter asked, that's simple, Margaret said. And that profound. Henderson pulled something from his pocket. The handkerchief, 22 years old, worn but carefully preserved. I've carried this since 1945, he told his family. In my wallet, every day. It reminds me why we fought, not to conquer, to free, not to destroy, to rebuild. This handkerchief from a German nurse, it's proof that people can change, that enemies can become friends, that kindness is stronger than hate. Margaret was crying. You kept it, always. They promised to write, to stay in touch. The families exchanged addresses. Henderson gave her his mother's address in Alabama, still the same after all these years. As they parted, Henderson said, you did it, Maggie. You rebuilt Germany, made it better. We're still trying, she said, every day. That's all any of us can do. 1985, 40 years after liberation. Margaret was 65, retired from the hospital. Her children grown with children of their own. Germany prosperous. The European community forming. The past still present, but no longer consuming. She was invited to speak at a school, Holocaust education program. Required curriculum now. Students age 14 to 16. Her granddaughter Sophie, 16, has sat in the audience. Margaret stood before them. These children born into peace, born into prosperity, born into a Germany that had learned painfully what happened when people stopped asking questions. She told them the story, all of it. The chains, the fear, the propaganda, the question, the bacon, the awakening, the truth, the choice to rebuild. I stand before you as someone who lived through the worst of what Germany did, and someone who experienced the best of what America gave. In 1980, I was chained in a cattle car, left to die by my own government, told that Americans were monsters who would torture me. When that American sergeant opened the door, I expected cruelty. I was prepared for it. I'd built walls against it. But kindness, I had no defense against kindness. He asked when I last ate. 3 words. That's all it took. 3 words that shattered 5 years of propaganda, that broke through every lie I'd been taught. He gave me water, food, freedom, dignity. Not because I deserved it. I was the enemy. My country had killed his brother. But because I was human. And that's all that mattered to him. That breakfast, bacon, eggs, real coffee did more to defeat Nazi ideology than any bomb. Because you can't lie about kindness. You can't fake humanity. You can't hide the truth when it's sizzling on a plate in front of you. I learned something that day. Something I've spent 40 years teaching my children, my patients, anyone who will listen. People are people, no matter what uniform, no matter what flag, no matter what we're told about them. And once you see that, truly see it, you can never go back to hating. Germany made terrible choices. We murdered millions. We started a war that killed tens of millions more. We did that because we stopped seeing people as people. We labeled them, dehumanized them, made them enemies, subhumans, threats. The Americans won because they refused to do the same to us. They could have. God knows they had reason. But they chose mercy, chose humanity, chose to ask about breakfast instead of seeking revenge. That choice saved me, not just my life, my soul. So I'm asking you, don't ever stop asking questions. Don't ever accept cruelty as normal. Don't ever dehumanize people, even those you're told are enemies. Because the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or a bomb. It's a simple question asked with genuine concern. When did you last eat 3 words? One breakfast. A truth that changed everything. The students sat in silence, absorbing, understanding. After the talk, Sophie approached her grandmother. Oma, she said, I want to do something to honor what you learned. Margaret hugged her. You already are, Liebchen, just by listening, by understanding. But Sophie had more in mind. 1986. Sophie, now 19, volunteered at a refugee center in Stuttgart. Families fleeing conflicts in the Middle East, Africa, Asia. People displaced by war just as Germans had been 40 years before. One day a young girl arrived, 8 years old, from Lebanon. Terrified. She'd fled violence, lost family, seen things no child should see. She sat in the corner, refusing food, too afraid, too traumatized. Sophie remembered her grandmother's story, the question that broke through walls. She sat beside the girl, slowly, non-threateningly. In simple English, she asked, when did you last eat? The girl looked up, confusion in her eyes, then understanding, then tears, then finally acceptance. Sophie gave her bread, water. The girl ate slowly. Sophie thought of her grandmother, of Henderson, of a question asked in kindness 41 years ago. Kindness breaks through everything she thought, even fear, even hate, even lies. That evening, Sophie visited Margaret, told her about the girl. Margaret smiled, a deep, satisfied smile. You understand, she said. You really understand. It's not about forgiving the evil. It's about refusing to let evil define us. It's about seeing people as people. It's about asking the right questions. 3 words, Sophie said. That's all it took. Margaret nodded. 3 words. One breakfast in 1945. A truth passed down through generations, from an American sergeant to a German nurse, from a grandmother to her granddaughter, from enemy to friend to family. When did you last eat? Not just a question about hunger, a question about humanity, a question that reminds us we're all just people. Who need food? Who need kindness? Who need to be seen as human? That's the legacy of One Breakfast in 1945. That's the power of asking the right question. That's the truth that bacon and kindness taught the world. And 41 years later, in a refugee center in Stuttgart, that truth was still breaking down walls, still opening hearts, still proving that individual people choosing kindness can change everything. Margaret Brenner died in 1992, age 72, peacefully surrounded by family. At her funeral, Henderson sent a letter. Now 76, too frail to travel from Alabama, but still remembering, still carrying that handkerchief. The letter was read aloud. Maggie showed me that the enemy was human. I'd like to think I showed her the same. We were both prisoners of lies. We both chose to break free. She spent her life teaching others to ask questions, to show kindness, to see humanity in everyone. That's the best memorial anyone can have. When did you last eat? 3 simple words. But they contained everything that makes us human. Concern for the other, recognition of shared need, the understanding that we're all just people trying to survive. Maggie understood that, and she made sure the next generation understood it too. Rest well, my friend. You kept your promise. You rebuilt Germany into something better. And you taught the world that kindness is stronger than hate. The letter was placed in her casket along with a small embroidered handkerchief, a match to the one Henderson still carried. Sophie, now 25, stood at the funeral and spoke. My grandmother taught me that the most important question you can ask another person isn't about their beliefs or their politics or their nationality. It's about their basic human needs. When did you last eat? Are you safe? Do you need help? Those questions break down every wall, every lie, every hatred, because they remind us that we're all human, all vulnerable, all in need. That's what one American sergeant taught a German nurse in 1945, and that's what she spent her life teaching us. I'm a refugee worker because of her, because I believe what she believed, that kindness is strength, that mercy is power, that the way we treat our enemies defines us more than the way we treat our friends. Every day I meet people who've been told lies about other people, refugees who fear Germans because of propaganda, Germans who fear refugees because of fear. And every day I ask that question, the question that cuts through everything. When did you last eat? And every time I see the same thing my grandmother saw in 1945. Walls coming down, fear giving way to trust, hatred dissolving in the face of simple human kindness. 3 words, one breakfast, a legacy that will never die. Because as long as people choose to see other people as human, as long as we choose kindness over cruelty, mercy over revenge, understanding over hate, that question will keep breaking down walls. When did you last eat? The answer doesn't matter as much as the fact that someone cared enough to ask. That's what my grandmother taught me. That's what I'll teach my children. That's the truth that will set us all free. The funeral ended. The mourners dispersed. Life continued. But the question remained, passed from Henderson to Margaret to Sophie to countless others. A simple question that contains the whole of human dignity. When did you last eat? 3 words. One breakfast in a frozen German rail yard in 1945. A truth that changed one woman's life and rippled out across generations. Proving that the smallest acts of kindness can echo through time. That individual choices matter. That people are always more than the labels we put on them. And that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is ask someone if they're hungry, then feed them. Not because they deserve it, but because they're human. And that's all the reason you'll ever need.